You've seen the best.
You've seen the worst.
Now here's the rest of both worlds.
I'm GayFesh. In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups.
And I'm Ari, the police who investigate the crime and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders.
I'm Demon Mama. These are their stories. Boom, boom.
And today we will be discussing the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The Measure of a Man. Demon Mama, welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. I'm excited. I'm excited for this project and happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know that you've watched Star Trek at least somewhat, but why don't you talk about what you've seen? Would you consider yourself a fan?
Yeah, I would consider myself like a Star Trek fan for sure. I don't think I have the knowledge that a lot of like Star Trek fans generally would. But like when I was little, Star Trek was my first like outside of video games was probably my first obsession. I still remember when my dad got me the TNG phaser toy at long, like I literally remember the restaurant we were in when it happened. It was like late at night. It was like 9:30 and we were traveling at Florida and my dad was like, "Hey, I have a surprise for you." And we were at a restaurant and he had gone to a toy store earlier and seen the TNG phaser and I lost my mind. One of the first big toys I ever got when I was a kid that was like the like exciting birthday, Christmas present. I can't remember if it was birthday or Christmas for this one, but was the oh my God, is it the Warbird, the greenish ship that has like the curving down Bird of Prey. Yeah. And I had a giant toy of that had these little buttons that made all the sound effects on top, like hard plastic. You know, you could take the wings off or like if it got shot and whatever. It was so cool. So I've been a big fan. I've seen all of the Star Trek movies at some point in my life. Most recently, I did a watch through of the first three films, and then I've seen most, if not all, of TNG but not in like order. I've never watched the whole series through from beginning to end, but over the years I've watched pretty much every single episode in the series. I have not seen Deep Space Nine. I have seen the entire original Star Trek series, and I went to like a early launch of the first of the J.J. Abrams films. And I've seen all those. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time watching and thinking about and enjoying Star Trek. Oh, also the first song I ever learned on piano that was like from sheet music was the TNG intro theme. Oh,
that's so cool. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Jerry Goldsmith, so that's a good one to learn.
Yeah, it's amazing, and also just like even just before when we were watching the episode for today, like I was watching it with some of my housemates, and I don't know, it's just I still love that theme. I've heard it literally thousands of times, and it still sticks in my head. So I understand why when I was younger I was so driven to learn it. But yeah, so like again, I guess I would say that I'm like a casual fan in that way. I've seen like a lot of the show and I really like it and really respect it. But I guess I don't have like, I have never done full watch throughs of any of the seasons or anything like that. So I probably couldn't tell you episode names or anything like that.
Me either. So it's okay.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. I know that like, Star Trek is kind of famous for having, very, very passionate fans. And I get that 100%. I don't know. I guess maybe in recent years I haven't really kept up. I haven't watched Picard. I didn't really watch the Discovery, I think it was called. Star Trek Discovery, was that it? I didn't see those. I don't know. I don't watch a whole lot of TV anymore. But yeah, when I was younger, I was really, really, really into Star Trek, and I even remember having like little shirts did not look anything like it, but when I was a kid I had a yellow, red, blue shirt, and I would have the little Starfleet communicator badge. Oh, nice. Just lights up, and I would run around with that on just because I liked it so much. I used to watch it a lot with my dad.
That's so cool.
That's sort of my history with the show.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about The Measure of a Man. It's the 9th episode of the 2nd season. It first aired on the 13th of February, 1989. It was written by Melinda M. Snodgrass and directed by Robert Shearer.
This is the first poker episode.
Oh, there's more?
Poker is a running theme through the rest of the series. I always love it when they're playing poker. Jade is always wearing that visor with the clear brim. And but this one is very much about, because it's Data's first time playing poker. And he doesn't really understand what bluffing is. Like, he loses to Riker even though he had a 3-pair and Riker was bluffing a flush. And he's like, it makes no sense to bet when you can't win. And Riker's like, but I did win. I was betting that you wouldn't call me.
Yeah, the bet isn't on the cards. The bet's on the intentions of the other person. I will admit, when I first ever heard the title of this episode, I did think it was going to be about something very different. I also did not think it was a Star Trek episode, and I was like, wait a minute, is this my porn collection? Nah, but no, I was really happy to watch this episode again, because first of all, I don't know, I feel like this is one of the best TNG episodes, certainly one of the ones I remember the best from the last time I watched the series, and the opening poker scene is a fantastic tone setter for the episode.
It is. It really does set it up. Like, it's different. And this whole episode had a different tone than all the ones that I've seen so far. And so having that poker, it really set it up. You know, like, okay, this is different. It also, of course, reminded me of Battlestar Galactica, because that's in the miniseries when Kara punches out. Who does she punch out?
Ty. She punches out Ty. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminded me of that. So, you know me, I like everything to be a reference. But I just thought I thought it was a really cool intro. It was one of my favorites so far, actually.
So the basic plot of this is that they're at a starbase, and there is a scientist, Bruce Maddox, who wants to take Data apart. He wants to study his brain, take him apart and put him back together. And Data doesn't want to do it because he doesn't feel confident that Bruce Maddox can do it without basically killing him. He's like, we can just dump your memory into the station computer. And he's like, yeah, but I think you're going to lose the quality of it. I think it would just end up being facts and figures. And you kind of, he didn't say soul, but it was kind of like that implication, like you would lose the flavor of it.
I think the words he said was you would lose an ineffable quality. And it was funny because me and my partner were both watching it, and we kind of paused it for a moment and went back and forth about whether or not that's a bit of an essentialist position about memory and experience. But I think I think it's the ineffable quality that's lost. And I think there's a few ways to interpret that. I think one way is to, the way the episode sort of centered on being that it's so tied up with the sort of talking about the legal precedent that follows from the episode. But I think it's also very interesting that there's like the soul angle, but there's also just like, well, how do we know that there's not a lot of information, contextual information that's being lost in the transfer process from this unbelievably complex android brain to a ship computer? Yeah, that's not even necessarily from a soul perspective, but just lost information. I don't know. I think that's interesting.
Because is the ship's computer going to be able to process the same speeds and rates and stuff that Data does? Even if we take the soul part out of it, like, is the computer going to be on par with the same type of thinking and logic that Data has?
He actually gives his specs in this episode.
He did, yeah, I know, I remember that. Yeah,
and he said like he didn't use like the metric prefixes, so I had to do the calculations, but I calculated it. His brain has an internal memory storage capacity of 100 petabytes, and his processor runs at 60 terahertz.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So how fast? So is he smarter than or less smart than an iPhone?
Smarter than an iPhone, but he's probably about on par with an Android.
Oh, God damn it. I didn't even mean to set that one up. I didn't even mean to set that one up.
I saw it coming. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, you predicted me there. Oh, damn. I got fucking countered. Yeah. Oh God. Oh yeah, you wanted to probably finish the intro.
Let's.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Data it doesn't want to do it, but Maddox is like, well, look, I'm got orders from Starfleet to transfer you under my command, and you'll have to do it. And there's a JAG officer that Picard has a love-hate relationship with, because when he lost the Stargazer, she court-martialed him. But, he's like, look, I don't want him to do it. And she's like, well, he could always resign from Starfleet if he doesn't want to follow orders. But then Maddox is like, well, no, he can't resign from Starfleet. He's not a person. He's Starfleet's property. And that's what triggers the hearing, because the JAG officer, she's like, well, I think that's probably that's probably supported by precedent. And so Picard's like, well, I'm going to challenge this ruling. So he becomes the defendant. But interestingly, she's like, look, we're just setting the starbase up, so I don't have a legal office here yet. I don't have any staff. So
it's because they spent their entire budget on carpet. It was so carpeted.
Carpet and realistic poker chips, because they had a float of realistic poker chips.
In a pinch, I can use senior officers. So, Riker, you can go ahead and prosecute. And Riker's like, I'm not going to prosecute. The Data's my friend. I don't believe that he's not, a person. I don't believe that he's Starfleet property. And she's like, well, if you can't do it, then I'm just going to rule summarily that Data is a toaster. Which I was like, oh, hey, it's we talked about like the slur toaster for Cylons a couple episodes ago, didn't we?
Mm-hmm. We did. Yeah, that one was definitely a reference.
I feel like it was, yeah, because toaster, that's from the original BSG. That's what they called Cylons. But anyway, so Riker's like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And there's a wonderful scene where Riker is studying the schematics of Data, and he discovers Data's off switch, which is something that Data's kept pretty secret, but I think they learned about it from studying Lore's body.
I think so.
But as soon as he sees it, there's this wonderful bit of acting that Jonathan Frakes does, because his eyes light up, like he's like, I've got something. This is going to be good for the case. And then immediately he's like, oh, this is good for the case. And his head sinks, because he's just like, I am prosecuting my friend. And I love that. Now, I got to say, though, I don't think, and I actually watched a Legal Eagle video where he reviewed this episode, and he said that picking Riker to do it, he's like, well, I think there's a conflict of interest inherently in having him be the prosecutor. And I think it would just make sense to have Bruce Maddox be the prosecutor, because he's the same rank as Riker. He's a commander, and he's the one who wants it, so it would make sense for him to prosecute. But it ups the stakes if Riker has to.
Reduces the dramatic tension, and also it lets that last scene at the very end of the episode unfold, which is an awesome scene.
Yes, it is. So they go through the trial, and Riker's arguments are mostly breaking down like the facts and figures of Data's existence, pretty much pointing out that he is a machine. Like, he removes his arm and shows it, has him bend some steel, presses his off button.
I know. I really wanted the "I have been murdered" to start playing, because I was like, oh my God. I was writing a note and I went, oh my God, he just killed Data.
Honestly, it's funny. Like, I would say that the arm removal is almost, like, at least how the show presents it, it's almost more offensive than hitting his off switch. Like, the sort of clinical distanced, cold way in which they just are like, I am going to humiliate you. I'm going to remove your body part for the purposes of illustrating that you're a machine. That is one of the like most harrowing moments in the show, and it was really funny.
It would be like taking off an amputee's prosthetic limb.
Yeah, but just to demonstrate,
showing it to people.
Yeah. It's really messed up. And I was watching again with my housemates, and one of them was like, I'm really getting some transgender court case vibes from this. What with
I did too.
Yeah, right? Like, there's obviously there's direct references to slavery. Like, that's like an extremely major part of the show. But in that portion, there is something particularly a strong parallel between the idea of the invasion of privacy and the disrespect for basic human dignity that you see in cases, in contemporary cases against, trans people, that is very similar, that very much involves around the spectacle of making a spectacle out of somebody's body and the complete disregard for privacy. Not to mention, of course, the very, very pointed use of against Data's will of using it pronouns to dehumanize
over
him.
and over again. Yeah.
Even the Jazdog
somewhere in my
officer,
notes
she did
it
it.
says this whole episode is just misgendering Data. Yeah.
Yeah, like aggressively, like just completely
Aggressively.
dehumanizing him. And obviously he's like an android, but like the term of dehumanized does not literally have anything to do with being a human. Yeah, depersonalized. Yeah, it's removing the personhood of somebody. And I remember there's actually two moments in the episode that are like this. The one is where Maddox just like sort of goes into his private quarters and starts touching his stuff, which is just
I know,
like,
and he's like, don't you usually ask before you come into someone's room? But Maddox doesn't even see him as a someone.
yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, and it's very, very. It goes past like dramatic effect and then becomes too real, because it's like for a bit of the episode you're like, oh my god, this is really on the nose, and then it keeps going and it's like, okay, wait, this is actually really, really on the nose, and it really hurts, because god, does it draw some parallels to our existence now. Yeah.
So after Riker's arguments, Picard calls a recess because he feels like he got his ass kicked. And he goes to 10 forward, as you do, because Guinan is going to be there to drop her pearls of wisdom. Yes. And she points out how throughout history there have always been disposable people who our society has been built on. And if Bruce Maddox wins this case and Data is not a person, and Maddox gets to build a bunch of Datas that are all property of Starfleet, what does that make them?
Slaves.
Well, and thank God she was here to remind Picard of that, right?
Yeah, because that hadn't occurred to him.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it does kind of, but like there's a part where she says, where she's like, where he's like, oh, they would be slaves. And then she's like, well, that's putting it harshly. And then he's kind of like, no, that's not putting it harshly. Like, no, this is exactly what it is. I really liked that conversation. I thought, I mean, obviously they're always good, but like,
Right.
I thought it was good because it's like, it kind of shows the process of like Picard. I guess I would say like him distilling his sort of sentiments into something that can be presented to others. Because one of the things that like seems to be a major theme of this is like Picard's his sort of disdain for like dogmatic adherence to regulation. He makes numerous jabs at that throughout the episode, and I think it's interesting to see him sort of take his way of thinking about things and condense it down into like, oh wait, no, like this is slavery. That is not putting it harshly. That is exactly what it is. It's not just something I personally disagree with. This is a systemic thing that's going to affect lots of people. So yeah.
It's also interesting too, because in Star Trek Picard, there's this episode isn't referenced directly, but the first season of Star Trek Picard actually deals very much with some of these themes, because there is a terrorist attack that was carried out by androids, and as a result, the Federation bans androids. But the androids that did it were basically like Data clones, and they're all treated like shit before they do it. And you're looking at this like, this is what Picard was warning us about. Now these ones, they're not as complicated as Data. They're not fully sentient, but they all have the gold skin and the yellow eyes, and they kind of look and move like Data. And they're the ones who carry out the attack. So it was very much. I'm sure that the writers had this episode in mind when they set that up, and it's like, ooh, that's chilling.
Yeah, it sort of indicates some of the unresolved carryovers that still exist within the Federation.
So Picard goes to give his statements, and a lot of what his argument is built on is sentiment. particularly Data's capacity for sentiment, because he looks through the little tote that Data packed when he was resigning his commission, things that he was going to take with him. He's got his service medals, and Picard asks, well, why did you take those? He's like, I don't know. They felt like they meant something to me. He's got a book that Picard had given him as a gift, and he reminded him of his friendship with Picard. And
did they happen to say what the book was? Because I was really hoping it was Sherlock Holmes. But did they mention? I didn't catch if they said what the book was.
I didn't catch what the book was either. Maddox did read a line from it, so I'm sure if I Google that, I could find out what the book is.
Oh, yeah, he did. That's right.
But and then the final thing is a hologram of Tasha. And Data's very hesitant to talk about that because he's like, no, I promised Tasha I wouldn't tell anyone about this. And Picard's like, I think in this case, I think Tasha wouldn't mind. I think she'd be okay with it. And so he talks about how they were intimate, and even though she's gone, she holds a special place for him. It's one. But
even the fact that he didn't want to talk about it was so human. Like the fact that he had made a promise to Tasha was so human that he didn't want to break that promise. If he was just a logical computer, he would look at it and go, "Oh, it would help me in this case to betray Tasha." He wouldn't have that sentimentality about it.
And I want to point out here, like, there is in this throughout this entire episode, we've touched on a couple examples of it, but there's this consistent focus put on the sort of arbitrary invasiveness of the entire process.
Yes.
Like Data is forced to have his arm taken off in front of people. He's forced to be shut down in front of other people. He's forced to talk about his intimate relationship with a human that died in front of other people. His personal space is invaded, and there's this all of this because the powers that be, some individual within the powers that be, decided that he could potentially be useful as a tactical advantage. Like, there's nothing that Data did to provoke any of this except for exist, which is just
there's two lines in particular. The first one that I'm thinking of is when Picard's trying to talk Data into doing it at the beginning, and Data, points out, well, if Geordi's eyes are better than yours, why doesn't everyone get cybernetic eyes? But then and when Picard doesn't have a response, he's like, it's precisely because I am not human. Yeah. And the second line is when he finds out that he's not allowed to leave Starfleet. He says, from limitless options, I am reduced to one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see it. Like, even though Data doesn't have emotions in the way that a human does, you can see that there is a level of despair through the episode. Even at the beginning, when he notices Maddox come on the bridge, he's like, I remember you.
Yeah.
He was the only guy who voted against Data's admission to Starfleet on the council.
Yep.
And he's like, I remember this guy. I don't trust this guy. This guy's bad news.
And right during this part where they bring Tasha out and they're talking about this, I think it's Picard said, our children property. And, this is actually something I'm kind of passionate about, because no, children are not property as much as people think their children are their property. They're human beings that, yes, sure, you had sex and you made them and now they exist, but that does not mean they are your property. You don't get to decide what they do and say and how they act. And I'm very passionate about this. And I couldn't quite tell where Picard was going, but it seemed to be that children aren't property, was what he was implying. But a lot of people sure do think children are property,
Yeah, this is actually something, of course, some people who know some of my other stuff know that this has been an issue of contention. I've engaged in that discussion numerous times, of this idea that, like, right now, a lot of people really do think that children are property. They treat children like property. And that extends not just to the sort of common arguments that people make. Oh, well, like, what? Do you think kids should just be allowed to touch a hot stove? It's like, no. Right. You're taking a sort of protective and kind action, and you're using that as a justification to say, oh, well, because children don't know everything about the world yet, that means I get to decide everything for them, including things they don't want to do or things that might hurt them. And I think that's, like, such a sickening position. And I'm glad
disgusting.
that, like, it's brought up in parallel. There's a lot of that's another thing I like about this episode a lot, is there's parallels made not just to one liberatory struggle or liberation struggle, but multiple. There's distinct, decision making in that front that I think is really effective.
Yeah, I agree. I thought in that way, I was so excited to see him bring it up in that context, because so many people, especially 1989, thought thinks their kids are their property. I mean, I see it to this day. I see people, the whole, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it. No, you can't. That's murder. That's murder, yeah. Yeah, like I mean, my kids are my kids, I have them and they exist and I'm here to nurture them, but I don't control what they do,
Yeah, nor should you, nor should anybody. Like, we shouldn't have that type of dominance over others.
And I've really felt that here. And what GayFesh said about how you could feel the sadness. This episode blew me away for Brent Spiner's ability to act. I really liked it. I thought this has actually been my favorite Data episode so far.
I love Data. I've always loved Data. I know some people don't like the way that he acts and whatever, but I love Data.
I don't know anyone.
I think Brent Spiner is. Well,
I know one person.
I think there's a couple of anti-Data people out there, which, you know what? They're all the Maddox out there.
Pulaski fans.
Yeah, exactly. So
speaking of Pulaski, why would you ever invite her to a poker game? She's so boring.
True. I think it's cool because this is an episode that very effectively. It's actually kind of funny because Picard is sort of made fun of by Maddox for being like, oh, you're just making emotional appeals. And it's like, okay, but actually that's kind of relevant here, whether or not there can be, empathizing between two beings that process emotions differently. I think that's one of the things that is recurring with Data's storyline, and I think this episode does like a really good job of it. It's like he doesn't not experience emotions. He does. He just constructs them and processes them via a different process than most people. And that doesn't mean that they're less or that they don't exist. It just means they have a different appearance and that some people can't recognize those as emotions. And perhaps even Data doesn't yet, which I mean, I think that's self-evident in his storyline, that Data doesn't have the words yet to describe what his emotions are or how they work. And
there's a reason why there are so many autistic Star Trek fans.
I mean, yeah. I think that, Data is, there's a big part of commentary on neurodivergence in the general storyline of Data. I think that's very intentional. But I think sometimes it's missed for lesser things. And it's funny because this episode is sort of the quintessential AI, Android rights setup. But it does go further than just making an argument about, could robots be people? No, it's like, how could a machine be a person, and how are humans feeling machines? Like, which is what we are.
When Picard takes over the trial and he starts trying to make Maddox prove that Picard is sentient, I was like, yeah, I can't prove I'm sentient. I can't prove that everything I ever do isn't pre-programmed. Like, how do you prove somebody is sentient? And I thought it was a smart, clever way for the writers to go with it. I thought it was really clever.
There was a line in this episode too that Maddox said that Star Trek actually does latch onto and explore in a future episode. And because Maddox was like, that this is all sentiment. If Data was a box on wheels, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And he's right in a way in that the other humans probably wouldn't recognize it, because Data having a human appearance does help to humanize him to them. There is a future episode in which Data recognizes that there's some robotic tools that have developed sentience, but other people don't recognize it, but he does, and he advocates for them. Yeah. And they just look like little triangle things with robot feet that have like a multi-tool at the front. They just look like a tool, but he's like, no, these are people.
Interesting.
And that's kind of along the same line, right? Like that Data's emotions don't look like everybody else's. They don't unfold in the same way, and so some people don't recognize them as existing at all. I think that's probably one of the things that Star Trek as a whole does a pretty good job of doing, is challenging like our prejudice towards like things that look exactly like us, and recognizing that the function of emotions can be the same even if the way that they unfold or the way that they're constructed is slightly different.
But I mean, how human for humans to decide to like judge whether something is sentient or not by how human they are, right? It's so human.
By how human, yeah. Very,
they're like, okay, well, is this thing human enough to be human? Well, how about if it's just its own thing? Because why are we the end all be all for deciding what sentience is and isn't, right?
That actually makes me think of there was a recent episode of Star Trek Discovery where they were pointing out how the universal translator itself is very biased, that it's very good at translating confirmation bias from Federation Standard to Klingon is the line, because and we even talked about the universal translator last episode, because there was a deaf man who the universal translator doesn't work on because it only translates audio. It doesn't do like sign language voicing.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And so the way that the Federation engages is they seek out life that is similar to them, that they communicate with in similar ways. And so there is an inherent bias there where they don't look for things they aren't thinking to look for.
Well, this is a constant problem in the real world with all kinds of algorithmic, learning AIs and automatic, content generated algorithms that generate content. Like we saw this even with things like facial recognition software, where there's huge gender and racial biases,
right?
That are totally that they're not even. It's not even the immediate bias of the individuals who make it. It's not like there was a racist on the team, like a dude who's just dropping slurs every 5 seconds programming your algorithm. It's just the fact that, a bunch of white people are making an algorithm, and well, they're gonna train it up on their coworkers first, who are also white people, and there's going to be a whole bunch of things that they don't realize. By the time that the algorithm goes out, it's already been from its base tested and shaped to favor seemingly invisible to the people who made it traits. And
there was a Better Off Ted episode where they had installed a new system that would like use biometrics for basically everything, getting like activating the elevator, using water fountains, getting through doors. But it didn't recognize any of the black employees.
I remember that episode, yeah.
And they ended up like, instead of ripping out the system, they just like hired white people to trail around the black people and activate things for them. And then because it was illegal to have a job opening only for white people, they had to also open it up to black people to be assistants. But then because the black people that they hired as assistants wouldn't be recognized by the system, they had to hire white people for them too. And so they're like, okay, let's cut the system.
the sunk cost fallacy of like, no, we can't fix the systemic racial bias problem. We have to just come up with a ridiculous workaround.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. There's so much in this episode that draws parallels to topics I talk about on my politics stream all the time with regard to the sort of arrogant presumptiveness and projection of worldview that just keeps occurring. This episode slams on it so hard, and I really appreciate that about it, because
I did too, especially for the era it's from 1989. Yeah. Like
there was a reason that I asked you specifically on this episode, because I knew you would have good things to say about this one. This is one of my 3 favorite episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I think I said this in a previous episode of the podcast that I will say when we get to one of my 3 favorites, but this is the first one.
Awesome. I did not know that. Yeah.
I mean, a good choice in my opinion.
And the 3 that I have picked them for very different reasons. I think they all exemplify the strengths of the different kinds of storytelling that Star Trek has, and this one is very much the strongest of the morality tales that Star Trek tells. The consideration of the different and the recognition of different forms of life and different people and equality and rights and all that. And that's something Star Trek's always been really good at telling. Sometimes it's been pretty on the nose, like when you have a race that is white on one side and black on the other, and they fight over which side the black side is. But I think this one, it's a little, I think it's still pretty on the nose, but probably handled with not so much of a hammer.
Yeah, well, I think it's just very it's definitely loud and on the nose, but it's incredibly accurate. I don't think it's possible for it to. I don't think it's fair for anybody to say that it's like, you know, careless with what it's delivering. It's extremely pointed. It's very much pointing a finger directly at the audience and going, you should be thinking about these things too. But it does so very, very effectively and accurately and with a lot of sensitivity that I appreciate. There's another part of this. Okay, this is really funny. This is a total almost a side note, but okay. At the end of the episode, did we notice the are you paying for dinner part?
I did notice that.
I love that ending because first of all, it's like, wait a minute, who's paying for anything?
There's no money in the future.
There's no fucking money. But secondly, it's like, yes, we just had an episode about like carryover prejudice. It's like immediately like the gender tension is immediately reintroduced and like almost laughed off at the end of the episode. I just thought that was a great touch. I thought it was
I assume that line was just there like it's a figure of speech. Like obviously it's the future. They don't buy anything and they're just going up to the replicator to have it made. So
yeah. I just think it's very funny outside of the like if you step outside of the universe and you go, okay, so they just had a conversation about humanity, slavery, and then it's like immediately just like, yes, this is extremely outdated, highly gendered tradition.
Plus, why I couldn't stand that lady. I don't know why you'd want to go to dinner with her anyway. I did not like her at all. I had a hard time liking her. I really tried to like her. I did, even when she came around, but I couldn't like her.
My partner was like, wait a minute, weren't you just when she tells off Maddox for like using the wrong pronouns for Data?
She also
you were
uses
just
them.
doing that. I'm like, and I was like, my response to my partner was like, yeah, but she's already been established as a complete asshole. So,
well, she's the woke white woman now, so she knows everything, right? Yeah, she's never done anything wrong.
she made the ruling now. There wasn't a ruling before. Now he's being offensive.
How dare.
The court has determined this is extremely offensive, and so now she can be like, yeah, now just like extremely legal minded to the lawyer brain of unbelievable degree.
We have now defined that Data is a person, so you may now use his correct pronouns.
Yeah. And if you don't, then I'll call you an idiot, even though I was just doing it literally 10 seconds ago.
Like literally 10 seconds ago. So one of my favorite lines that made me laugh was Starfleet doesn't ignore its own regulations when it becomes inconvenient, because they do.
All the time. Picard has violated the Prime Directive on multiple occasions. Even when he says he's not, he totally is doing it.
I know. I was like, what in the heck, guys? At least, have a little bit more self-awareness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, isn't that the purview of representatives of such powers, is that they always say that they follow all their own rules, and they never do.
That's true. Data is exactly the kind of person that would save wrapping paper too. That was another part of the episode that I thought was hilarious, because he's exactly the kind of person that would be like, "Oh, I must save this paper for later."
I could use it to rewrap in the future. Excellent.
And I love how when Wesley's like, "You're missing the point, Data." At that point, the wrapping is already off and already able to be saved.
I know.
But because Data's like, "Well, I'm trying to be more human," and Wesley's like, "You're missing the point," he takes the perfect wrapping paper that has been separated and tears it in half.
I know. I thought it was great. But I want to read that Klingon novel.
Me too. That's what I was thinking. He was like, Worf is like the novel, the art form of the novel was perfected by the Klingons, and it's just like,
I was like, ooh, give me that.
damn, that's gonna be a good ass novel then. I want to read The Dream of the Fire.
I know.
By Kratak. That sounds awesome.
That reminds me of Star Trek VI. There was a lengthy discussion in the dinner scene in Star Trek VI about how you have not experienced true Shakespeare until you have read it in the original Klingon. And the villain of the movie, General Chang, basically every line that he has is a Shakespeare quote. And he's played by why am I blanking on the actor's name? He played Captain Von Trapp in Sound of Music.
Christopher Plummer.
Christopher Plummer. And he's hamming it up the whole time, having a blast. And I think that because of that line, Mark Okrand, who is the lead developer of the Klingon language, I think he translated the complete works of Shakespeare into Klingon.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Absolutely incredible. I love it. I love it.
So the final scene of the show is Riker's sitting off by himself in the conference room, and Data's like, we're having a party in the holodeck. Do you want to come? And Riker's like, I don't deserve to be there. I almost won that case. I almost stripped you of your rights.
I was almost too good at my job. Yeah.
and Data's like, well, if you hadn't taken that job, she would have ruled summarily, right?
Yeah, I have the quote here. That act injured you and saved me. I will not forget it.
Yes.
And then he says, you are a wise man, my friend. And then Data replies, not yet, sir, but with your help, I'm learning.
With your help, I'm learning. I wrote that part down, too, because I just thought it was so good. Yeah.
Cute. That is so cute. So this won't make sense to anyone who's not familiar with my own situation, but it will make sense to GayFesh, which was that Doe like audibly was like, oh, when that scene happened. I was like, yeah, I know. It's like it is such a great way to end the episode. And I don't know. I love it. I love that ending. It is very wholesome and also very, very much needed after an episode like that.
Riker needed forgiveness in that episode, and Data was there to give it to him because Riker was put in an unenviable position where he did harm to Data. I mean, he humiliated Data in that courtroom, and it was his job to do so. And so having that bookend where Data's like, no, you're my friend, and you saved my life. It needed that.
Well, I think the Demon Mama hit it on the head with the whole how uncomfortable it was taking off the hand and like showing it around everybody. And that was such an uncomfortable moment between the two of them that they really did have to have a moment. Otherwise, like if we just ignored that extremely humiliating, uncomfortable moment, it would have still been sitting there, at least in the back of my head, that it needed to be addressed still because it was so hard. It was hard to watch.
Yeah, this sort of short scene at the end, I think it really seals off the emotional impact of the episode in a way where I think the rest would be less impactful if it wasn't there. Yes, of course, it's always a very good feeling to see two characters that you like resolve their issues. But also, it's like, it's an acknowledgement that both characters felt what was going on in that room. And that perhaps from obviously, and definitionally from different perspectives, but that they both acknowledged the severity and the danger of the stakes that were on both sides, and yet their friendship held ultimately strong despite that. And I think that like that's the best way to show that, is to show that like Riker understood the gravity of what was going on there, but Data also understood the sort of inhumanity of the machine that was putting both of them into this position.
Right.
Because it wasn't Riker did everything that he could to not be in that position. He was essentially, much like Data, forced into a position that's, the stakes weren't directly on the immediate stakes weren't on his head. He can choose to go along with it, but what's his other option? Resign? And then also damn his friend to disassembly. Yeah, he doesn't really have much of a choice. And I don't know. I think it's really great to see them both acknowledge one another's like mutual unjust treatment by the court that was just held.
Yeah, and it was very human too, like of Data to like have that conversation. It was very human, you know?
Yeah.
There was a great bit where Data has won the case and he goes to Maddox and says, I refuse the procedure. And Maddox is like, I'll cancel the request. And Data says, your work is intriguing. Keep at it. Keep in contact with me.
Yeah.
When you're ready, I'll still be around. And Bruce Maddox is actually referenced later in Star Trek. It turns out Data still corresponds with him. So even though this guy was ready to, deny Data's personhood and tear him apart, Data was very quick to forgive and to work with him. He's a bigger man than I would have been. I would have probably been like, hey, don't walk near an airlock anywhere near me because I probably will shove you out it.
Somewhere in my notes it says this episode has so many punchable people. So yes, bigger person than me too. I probably would have just punched him out, but yeah.
Well, okay, so there's two parts of that I want to touch on. First of all, it is a nice touch to have like the most gracious and forgiving character in the entire episode to be the person who just got put through ultimate hell. Like Data's grace in dealing with all of that is more than I think almost anyone can imagine having. Like, I can't imagine keeping my cool in a situation like that.
No.
But another thing, I just remembered that I remembered what I was going to say earlier, and I think it's still relevant. So I was recently reading a paper. I didn't even really actually like the paper all that much, but there was a part where in this paper they were talking about a perspective on Alan Turing and the Turing test. And they sort of hypothesized that part of the reason that like Alan Turing was so capable of developing this concept of the Turing test was because he had lived his entire life being denied humanity. So he developed the Turing test from the position of the one being tested, as a highly marginalized gay man who had basically had to learn to hide away the things that could literally get you, killed, arrested, persecuted, yes, literally, extensively. That he learned the from the reverse angle what things are going to be asked to determine personhood. And
that's so interesting. I knew none of this. That is so interesting.
Isn't that wild? Like, I mean, obviously, I don't know if Alan Turing wrote about that aspect himself or if this was like a conscious thing. But as a historical analysis, recognizing that the Turing test was developed from essentially, societally, from the perspective of the one being tested was something that I found profound. And I think it applies here very well. The idea that like, that a lot of times the inhumanity of others is presumed, and there are these sort of not wholly rational or fair signs that are tested for to determine, is this person worthy of life? And that zooming out and realizing that is the sort of setup that was just sort of passively existing under the surface this whole time is a bit harrowing to recognize, to see that like, okay, yeah, like there is a form of this test, this Turing test that everybody knows. Like, how do you find out if an AI is actually a thinking person or a sentient being? Well, this ties back to the biases that we were talking about that can be present in the prejudices that can be present even in systems that we think are robust. Like, no, like, as it turns out, the question alone of like, how do you determine something's sentience or its personhood, that in and of itself can be the process. The questions that are asked can be discriminatory and marginalizing in and of themselves.
Yeah. And forcing people to like prove what they are in various different ways is so harmful to people, like having to prove that you are, trans enough is an example. The first one off the top of my head, like, are you the gender that you say you are? People always have a million questions and stuff. And I work with young gay kids because I help run the GSA at the high school I work at. And, I tell them all the time, that's your choice. It's your choice. But people always want you to meet the hoops that they expect you to jump through, and you're expected to jump through them, and so it's really interesting to look at it and the episode from that perspective.
There's like varying degrees of that as well, that like you could draw of course, exactly like you said, you can draw a lot of parallels to the experience of queer people in our society, but I think there's multiple ways. We recognize it. Most people will recognize it easily more easily when it's presented to something like this, a court case that determines whether or not someone is a person. But I think that a lot of the little passive acts that are depicted in this episode are very representative of that daily struggle of, okay, here are a bunch of, there's a bunch of people out there. In this case, it's not the staff of the Enterprise. The staff of the Enterprise have, the crew of the Enterprise have accepted him without ever needing to ask any questions like that. You know what I mean? Like, it is almost self-evident from their engagements with him that he is a person. But there's a whole bunch of people who essentially passively demand that Data speak for what he is, something that they don't have to do. They're not required to do.
Well, and someone up at higher up at Starfleet had signed the order to move him over without even talking to him. Like, that happens to people all the time too, where like things happen and it was just completely out of his control. And would you want to be on trial to have to prove that you're a human? I think that was the question that the episode asked. What would you say? How would you prove you were human? You know?
And I mean, to draw to a like immediate politically relevant a topic, we just had in Texas a bill go through that did exactly that. It is essentially saying like, no, like kids who are in treatment for gender dysphoria are now to be investigated by the state. Them and their parents can be investigated by the state. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just living their life and seeking out solutions to their own problems. And now they're being investigated by a hostile entity that is demanding them justify doing the things that they have found to work for themselves and that they have found to be perfectly, like make them happy. That is there's so many direct parallels of that, of this sort of like out of nowhere being blindsided by an entity that is asking you to justify the basic foundation of your existence.
Why I should let you continue to be who you are. You know who you are, but now you need to prove it to me or I'm not going to let you because I know better than you.
Or I'm going to disassemble you so that I can improve my the ships in my fleet.
Exactly. Oof. I'm just like, I'm shaking a little bit with anger. It makes me so mad,
And again, I think that speaks to the continued relevance and power of this episode and the presentation of the issues and, of course, the gravity with which the actors handle the issues.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best ones that I've seen so far. And obviously, if it's in your top 3 GayFesh, then obviously you too, right?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm Ari.
And I'm GayFesh.
And I'm Demon Mama.
And until next time,
live long and prosper.
Thanks for watching.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified when new episodes come out.
We're on Twitter at Rest Both Worlds.
Join our Patreon at patreon.com/restofbothworlds for bonus content and hear your name at the end of each episode.